Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast presented by Bee Culture. Beekeeping Today podcast is your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment. I'm Jeff Ott.
And I'm Kim Flatham.
Hey, Jeff and Kim. Today's sponsor is Global Patties. They're a family-operated business that manufactures protein supplement patties for honeybees. It's a good time to think about honeybee nutrition. Feeding your hives protein supplement patties will ensure that they produce strong and healthy colonies by increasing brood production and overall honey flow. Now is a great time to consider what type of patty is right for your area and your honeybees. Global offers a variety of standard patties as well as custom patties to meet your needs. No matter where you are, Global is ready to serve you out of their manufacturing plants in Airdrie, Alberta, and in Butte, Montana, or from distribution depots across the continent. Visit them today at www.globalpatties.com.
Hey, thanks, Sherry, and hey, everybody, thanks a lot for joining us. You know, each week we get to talk about how much we appreciate our sponsor support. They help make all of this happen and provide us the ability to bring you each episode. With that, thanks to Bee Culture Magazine for continuing their presenting sponsorship of this podcast. Bee Culture has been the magazine for American beekeeping since 1873. Subscribe to Bee Culture today. We also want to thank 2 Million Blossoms as sponsor of this episode. 2 Million Blossoms is a quarterly magazine dedicated to protecting all pollinators. Learn more on our Season 2, Episode 9 podcast with editor Kirsten Trainer and from visiting www.2millionblossoms.com, and that is with a number 2. And while you're out there, make sure you check out her brand new podcast, 2 Million Blossoms, the podcast, available from her website and also from wherever you download and stream your shows. Whew, now that we're done paying the bills, hey, now we can get down to some fun talk. Today we continue our discussion on hive types other than Langstroth, and we're talking with Christy Hemenway about top bar hives. Hey, Kim, you've known Christy for quite a while, haven't you?
Yeah, I knew her when she got started, when she was up in Maine. And her driving force was not so much the top bar hive itself, it was the wax that was produced in a top bar hive, because it was, well, her saying is it's all about the wax. Mm-hmm. And you know, foundation comes with its own inherent problems, and she wanted to avoid that. 14 years later, she's still avoiding it and has made a business out of it.
Very good. Yeah, well, that's really interesting. I look forward to hearing from her.
Yep. And like I said, for her, it's all about the wax, and she makes it work.
Hey, so Honeybee Obscura, boy, you guys are just shooting them out one at a time. This last week, you had a podcast on stings. Now, that's a popular topic, I'm sure.
You know, well, two things. One is 3 beekeepers in a bar. What's the worst place? What's the worst incident you've been stung? That's always a good and I can't repeat most of those here.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were talking, Jim and I were talking about stings, and you know, it's part of beekeeping, and what can you do about it? What's the best way to avoid them? What kind of protective gear do you need? What kind of days should you work and not work? The thing that brought my attention to it is long ago and far away, I knew a beekeeper back in Wisconsin who had a big, full beard, kind of like I have now, maybe even bigger and fuller. And he one day he just took me aside and he said, "You know why beekeepers wear beards?" And it never dawned on me. Mm-hmm. And he said, "Well," he says, "you go back to when I was a kid." He said, "Veils weren't as good as they are now, and it wasn't uncommon for bees to get in a veil. And if you had a big full beard, you had a sort of a roadblock for them getting to your face or your cheeks or your eyes or whatever, and it gave you a pause that you could reach in and grab that bee and squeeze it before it got you." So we were talking about that. Jim and I were talking about that, and our friend Mark in North Carolina mentioned. He says, "You know," he says, "I get a bee in my veil," and he says, "it seems to turn on the kill the bear adventure in those bees." He said, "So I don't know about that second choice you have there, but anyway, it helps me. I don't get bees in my veil hardly ever because I got a good." And that's the thing about having a good veil anymore. But When I do, or if I'm just outside working in the garden and suddenly, a bee comes along, and that happens once in a while. You get one caught in your beard and they get caught and they panic, but you got a second where you can reach up and get her out of there.
I mean, that raises the question, does the bee panic because it's stuck in the beard, like Mark suggested, or if there was no beard, would it just hit you and then fly off?
Good question. I'm not going to experiment.
Yeah, I haven't seen you without a beard in quite a few years, I think.
It's been a long time.
Yeah. All right, real good. Well, I encourage all of our listeners to get out to www.honeybeeobscura.com and listen to Kim and Jim discuss all things honeybees. I am sure you will enjoy it. And while we're talking about podcasts, get out and listen to Kirsten Trainer's podcast, 2 Million Blossoms, the podcast. It's available wherever you download and stream your shows, and also available directly from her website at www.2millionblossoms.com. I'm sure you'll enjoy that as well.
Yeah, she does a good job. And I don't know where she gets the time now that she's running that research institute in Germany, but she seems to find it.
Yeah, she's always running. Kim, each week we ask our listeners to send us questions and comments, and we've been receiving them. It's really exciting. We try to get to all of them, and we will reply to them eventually.
Yeah.
This week, Kim, you replied to one from Nicholas, and I'm going to read it here. And I thought it was a good letter, and you had a good reply. And I wanted to read it here for our other listeners so that you could share the knowledge. Nicholas writes that he's a 25-year-old beekeeper in southern Indiana and has been listening to the shows for 2 years, and ever since he's gotten into beekeeping. And he has a broad question. In our opinion, what are the biggest threats to managed and unmanaged bees across the United States? And what can beekeepers and a general public do to reverse the decline in honeybees and pollinators alike?
Well, it's a general question, and it's kind of tough to be specific. So what I came back with, our friends at the Honeybee Health Coalition basically answer that question with the 3 Ps: pests and predators, pesticides, and poor nutrition. And so pests and predators, Varroa leads the pack there, and there's the other things that are behind it. And there are good management issues that you can use to deal with those, all the way from nothing to aggressive chemical. When it comes to pesticides, it's where do you go? And, what do you live by? And you can make good decisions to be as far away from agriculture as you can possibly get, given your local circumstances. And poor nutrition, of course, is the same thing. It's where are you going to put your bees? Is there something there to eat from early spring to late fall? And those are the things you need to look at before you get bees. And if you're starting to have trouble after you get them, what can I do to either fix the situation or move my bees to another location? So it's a general question, and I gave him a general answer, but I'm comfortable with the information that I provided because it came right from the Honeybee Health Coalition.
Yeah. Well, it's really good. I think it's, like you said, it's valuable no matter where you are. All right. Well, let's get into our episode about top bar hives with Christy. But before we do that, a quick word from our friends at Strong Microbials.
Hello, beekeepers. Your honeybees face a lot of challenges out there. Unbalanced food sources from monoculture crops, holding yards, drought, food shortages, antibiotics, pesticides, and pathogens like chalk brood. To overcome these challenges, your bees need the multiple bacteria that are in all nectars, pollens, and the environment. These bacteria aid honeybees' digestion and improve your honeybees' response and resilience to pesticides. Now you can help improve your honey colony health with a quick, easy, and safe-to-use product. Strong Microbials Super DFM Honeybee uses naturally occurring bacteria to restore the healthy gut biome of your honeybees. Check them out today at www.strongmicrobials.com.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. I want to welcome Christy Hemenway to the Beekeeping Today podcast. Welcome, Christy.
Hey, guys, great to see you.
It's good to see you again, Christy. We haven't talked in a long time.
It has
Last time we talked, you were living in North Carolina, and now I understand you're back in Maine?
That's a true statement. We're happy to be back, even though it has been pretty chilly.
You missed the winters up there, huh?
Well, one reason to come back to May. Winter's just the beginning.
Well, Chrissy, you're probably one of the best people to talk about top bar hives. You've written 2 books on them, and you've been messing around with them for, I'm going to say, 15 years. Am I close?
07, it's 14. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got a lot. You've made every mistake that can be made, I'm going to guess, and you've done everything with a top bar hive that probably can be done or should be done anyway. So that's why we brought you into this. I wanted to let you talk about your experience with top bar hives, the pluses and the minuses, and things you might do different or better or otherwise, and give our listeners a feel for, I'm not going to ask you to sell me a top bar hive, but I'm going to ask you to sell me top bar hive beekeeping. How's that?
That sounds like a plan.
Okay.
That's really what it was all about for me anyway.
So how does a top bar, I mean, I know what they look like, and I've run one for a while. But tell folks how a top bar hive works in terms of where the bees are, where they come and go. You don't have frames, you just have bars. So fill me in on a top bar hive, the structure of it.
All right. Well, the structure of the hive itself is where it differs from a typical Langstroth hive. And that is because the frames in a Langstroth hive are what determines the spacing between the combs, especially in the brood combs. In a top bar hive, that spacing is determined by the width of the top bars, but that means that the top bars all touch. And so now suddenly everything becomes very different. It's a horizontal hive. There's no vertical airflow. The bees don't go up between boxes. So in that way, it's very different. But truly, the most important thing, I think, is the fact that the lack of frames means that the bees are drawing their own natural wax down from that top bar. And if you think about how we sort of, shall we say, casually or cavalierly manipulated bees over the past 100 or so years, I think that something that occurred to me was important was that the wax be something that the bees had control over. So I liked that a lot about it. I also liked the fact that, a Langstroth hive is pretty heavy. And so it was a lot easier to deal with the heaviest piece of the hive being just the lid, 20 pounds, out of the way. And now you never have to lift another box. So that was another feature too. And I wound up getting so fixated, if you will, on the idea of clean wax that I once got to hear Jennifer Berry give a presentation where she was looking to add some of the miticides that were in use into the hive and see what the sublethal effects were on the bees. So not killing them, but what was happening to them that was stopping short of killing them. And in her process of setting up for that experiment, she found that all of the foundation she could buy was contaminated with the miticides that we've been using. And I was just, I've got a crunchy button that's pretty big. So I was horrified at the thought that it contaminated all this wax and then we're making foundation out of it again. And so those chemicals were accumulating. So clean wax really became my thing. When I give a talk, that's my straight out of the gate line is it's all about the wax.
Are you using a standard Langstroth top bar in the top bar hive?
No, actually, the top bar that is in the Gold Star hive that is my design is it's not even the same length. And frankly, I did that on purpose so that we would avoid the idea of people trying to take Langstroth equipment and put it in a top bar hive where I felt the focus should be on clean wax. So I wanted to keep people being able to do that. But it is, it's handy. A lot of people are doing top bar hives now where the equipment is interchangeable. But we went with a 17.5-inch long bar, 1 3/8 wide. And it's got, if you picture it, 17.5 inches, it's got a really deep bevel point that functions as a comb guide. And that's what makes it work to the extent that it does give them a good place to draw comb and line up their brood combs and basically do what they would do inside a tree.
Well, I can see how the top bars, by touching, essentially eliminate any spatial issues between combs. But the thing that I've always liked about top bar hives is the slant of the sides. Why are they slanted?
Well, there was a rumor that said that if you slanted them at 120 degrees, that the bees would not stick the comb to the sides. But do not be fooled by that, because if the bees wish to stick the wax to the sides, they're going to. And I really think, especially when it's warm and soft and fresh wax, that's like tack welding it in place. It helps it stay stable until it's had time to age up and get a little firmer. So the other reason that the 120 degrees made a little sense was because it so naturally mimics the catenary curve of a piece of comb. So that's another good reason for it. But there's plenty of people that have seen their bees make straight down square comb with no frame or foundation as well. So all of those arguments really boil down to bees are cavity nesters, and they'll pretty well follow the shape of whatever cavity you put them in.
And the top bar hive got its start, I think I read somewhere, or maybe I'm wrong, please correct me, in Africa?
The actual origin of a container where the combs could be picked up and examined started, I believe, in Greece. And you'll see, if you Google original top bar hive, you'll get a picture that came from one of Eva Crane's books. It's a round basket with sticks across the top, and the bees drew the comb from the sticks, and ta-da. So that's a pretty old picture. It is associated with Kenya because of some work done, sort of a Bees Without Borders kind of thing, from what I understand. And so it became, at least the style with the sloped sides, became known as a Kenya top bar hive.
If I recall, the history is the people from Canada were working with beekeepers in Africa, and the hives that they were using there when they first came over were logs hanging in trees. And they were harvesting the honey from the back. And what the Canadians did was kept the log, essentially the log format, so it's long. But rather than come at it from the back, they just made a top that you could raise up and remove top bars from, combs from, examine them, and then put them back. So it had sort of the advantage of the log tree in the hive, because, of course, Africanized bees are very migratory, so they would come and go 2 or 3 times a year. So it kept that format, but it made it Langstroth-like in that it had a top and you could remove the frames.
Right, you can get into it from the top,
right,
instead of like in a cylinder or a pipe.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the top bar hive that you see in the U.S. today is basically, that's how it got its start, was from Africa, and then people liked it for all of the reasons that Christy just said. It's lightweight. There's no heavy lifting.
I like that.
All of those good things.
No.
Yes, so do I.
Yeah, for real.
Christy, tell me about the entrance. Now, the log hives in Africa, the original ones, it was almost wherever they had a hole. But with the top bar hives we have here, we have choices: middle of one side or the on the end. Which one do you use, and why?
Well, basically, you could say there's 3 styles of top bar hives, and it's all based on where the entrance is. If it's going to be a flat slot similar to a Langstroth hive on the end, that's one version. The one that I emulated, I actually took the idea from Phil Chandler over in the UK, and I call that a side center entrance, because the entrances, doggone it, they're in the center of the long side. So for me, the point of that was that you could use 2 follower boards and install your bees in what I began to call a bee bowl. So you take out all your top bars, you put in 10 on one end, then a follower board, leave 10 bars, put in the other one, and then cover the rest with the other 10 bars. It's a 30 bar hive. And then you put your bees into the middle. It gives you a little bit of dead air space on either side, which has insulation properties. And I started keeping bees in Maine, so that seemed like a good idea to me. And so I held on to that design, because you can also manipulate the bees inside that box to basically do a split within the same box. And then, it buys you a few weeks so that you can get yourself another hive if you have indeed split a boomer hive. And that was really the biggest reason. And you can try to sort of slow down a swarm using that same mechanism to divide them in half and let half of the bees use the side center entrance, which is on the quote front, unquote, and then the other half can use the back entrance. So it's a way of making it very versatile, pretty easy to work with. The one thing that I think it causes that is challenging for beekeepers is because everything is so centrally focused, there's a tendency to want to put everything in the middle. Whereas you're the guy, Tim, who taught me the phrase unidirectional. You always want your bees to be moving in one direction. So what I do is you get that first follower board in, and the next top bar is where you hang your queen cage. So it's up against a surface, and they automatically only go in the other direction from that surface. And then what ends up happening because of the way it's set up to do them in the center when your entrance is in the long side, you end up running out of space, and you still have space that's on the, on the far side of where I hung my queen when I began. And I want that real estate back, but I don't want to just start adding those bars in on the other side of the existing brood nest, because that blows out the whole unidirectional bee thing. So you end up at one point taking all those bars out, moving them to the other end, and just sliding things down inside the hive in order to reclaim the real estate that you didn't get to use because you started in the middle.
Okay, that makes sense.
Not as advanced as it gets. Just trying to keep that one direction thing going on.
Now you've been doing these for enough years. What's your honey production like?
Well, you got to kind of step back and say most of the people that are interested in top bar hives are not driven by any kind of bottom line, and I can't tell you how many people say to me, "Oh, I'm not into it for the honey," So I don't really have, or do I keep numbers on, how much honey can I get out of it. But I will tell you that the honey that you get out of it came out of clean wax, so it's perfect for cut comb honey. And if you want to harvest it, then you're going to crush it and strain it. So you end up with a dual harvest. You've got the wax, you've got the honey. And in the meantime, you avoided a bunch of chemical use because you were starting from the natural wax.
So to state the obvious, Top Bar Hive is not for extracted honey production.
No, it's really not. The slogan used to be, it's not about the honey, it's about the bees. Goes trying to put your focus on the health of the bees.
You can harvest honey from the combs that you take out of the Top Bar Hive, and because of the way that Christy sets them up, you'll have combs that are just honey and not honey and brood. So you can, like she said, harvest them for cut comb, or you can crush them, and strain the honey out and keep the wax. Either one. And there are instruments on the market for doing just exactly that: pails and screens and things like that, so that you can harvest, crush, save the honey, save the wax.
Right, exactly. And it's nice to be able to say that your wax, if you've not treated it, now you've got the perfect product for any kind of body care products that you want to make. Lip balm, clean wax, all kind of goes together hand in hand.
What I used mine for when I was, and I still have some. I saved it all.
Yeah.
Was for my Langstroth hives, I use plastic foundation because I don't want that foundation that you're getting, and I would coat my plastic foundation sheets with the clean wax that I got from my Top Bar hive.
Your Top Bar, there you go. Sure, that makes sense.
In saying that, though, and I'll say this just for anybody the listeners who are out there thinking this, you're assuming that environmentally the bees are not contaminating the wax that they're bringing in.
There's a lot of difference between the bees randomly going out and encountering chemicals intentionally put on crops by farmers and the bee living in an environment where a beekeeper is intentionally putting the chemicals right into the hive. You're absolutely right. The bees gathers things, they bring it in, and sure, it all gets in the hive, but that's a far cry from us intentionally putting toxic chemicals inside the beehive and contaminating the wax with it.
Better Bee is pleased to sponsor today's episode of Beekeeping Today podcast. For over 40 years, Better Bee has supplied beekeepers across the country with the tools, equipment, and knowledge needed to succeed. Because many Better Bee employees are beekeepers themselves, they understand your needs and challenges and are better prepared to answer your beekeeping questions. From their colorful catalog to their support of beekeeper educational activities, including this podcast, Better Bee truly lives up to their tagline of beekeepers serving beekeepers. See for yourself at betterbee.com.
Is this going to be a good hive for a beginner?
Boy, that's an age-old question, isn't it? It's a good hive for a beginner that starts with no background, because they don't have to unlearn anything that they already feel like they're solidly planted in the Langstroth hive. But it's probably harder to make the transition than it is to just start in top bar hives. You do have to learn how to handle the comb, because it can be fragile if it's fresh. It gets fragile when it's warm. But there's nothing inherently more difficult about it. And in fact, because of the less lifting, it's a much less arduous process.
You brought up a good point right there, because I know this is going to happen to somebody who's just starting out. I pick up the top bar, I'm looking at the comb, I begin to twist it, and the comb falls off the top bar.
Yeah.
Can I fix that?
You can fix that, but you probably never have to do it again, because, boy, you do that once and it just makes your stomach hurt so bad to see it fall. But yeah, it can be fixed. And what I usually do is take a sling of some kind, usually fabric, and tack it to the top bar, go around the bottom of the comb, and push it up against the bar so that the bees can just rebuild it right back where it fell off of. It's not that easy if it's fresh and soft, because it's really squishy and there's babies in it, and it's a big trauma.
While we're talking about the frame of wax, do you start with a starter strip, a foundation, or is there a bead? How do you get them to center it on that top bar?
Well, the point of the bevel on the bottom of a gold star top bar that's what acts as their guide. They let's see, how do you describe this? If you could picture top bars that were flat on the bottom, the thing that seems to attract them is the edge. Like they can feel the edge of the piece of wood, and that's where they build the comb, which of course is not where you want it in that case, because it's not attached to much. But if you put a big, deep beveled point that, points down into the hive, that acts like that edge. And that's how they seem to decide, okay, we get it, let's build here.
The other advantage of that, Jeff, that bevel, is that in the same space, you get more surface area for them to attach the comb to. It makes the comb attached to the top bar stronger than if you just put it on a flat surface.
Exactly. Cool. It gives them more area to grab onto. But if I could pull one piece of information off the internet that I probably had some responsibility for it getting spread around, was the idea of having to paint wax on those top bars. I think that the real effect of doing that, and that's how I sold the Gold Star kit the first couple years that I made them, with the intent that was going to help the bees figure out what I wanted, build your comb here. But what ends up happening is I can paint the wax on the bars, and it's never going to adhere as securely as the bees will stick it to dry wood. So like I said, if I could snatch that one piece of information back off the internet, it would be, don't put anything on the bars. Let the bees have access to just plain old dry wood, and it will attach more securely.
Very cool.
Well, Chrissy, you've kind of given me a good picture of how to get started and how to manage the hive once the bees are going. What's the downside of top bar hives?
Well, it kind of depends on your take on beekeeping. If your focus is honey production, probably a top bar hive is not your first choice for maximizing it. If you're into migratory pollinating, also, they're not easy to move around. So, putting 4 Langstroth boxes on a pallet is a much simpler process. Although, you got to hand it off to Wyatt, who is doing pollination in top bar hives. So obviously anything can be done if you are just persistent enough and want to do it bad enough. But other than that, as far as the downside goes, I'd be hard pressed to think of an actual downside, a bad thing about it. Because think of the natural wax is so important to the bees, the ease of beekeeping for the beekeeper, especially as we keep on adding on years, that gets tied into it too. And Yeah. So all in all, it's a super easy, fun, very sort of natural, connected feeling way to keep bees for a backyard beekeeper, not somebody who's, hard driven commercial person, but it's a great backyard hive, and up to 10 is a pretty doable thing in your backyard if you're that motivated.
Is it available to buy online, or is it something I need to build from plans also found online?
Well, it's got a reputation for having been a build your own hive because there wasn't anybody who was doing them commercially. And then I came along right on the heels of Corwin Bell out in Colorado, and right about a year before a guy named Matt out in Oregon. And so Corwin is still out there, and I am still out here doing top bars. And Les has got some stuff going on, Les Crowder, who has a considerably longer history than I do even. And so they're not common. Like when you think of calling up a beekeeping supply place, you expect to get Langstroth hives, not top bar hives. So that's why I can pretty much number, or I can count the number of top bar hive producers commercially in the United States today.
And to give you a plug, your company's name is Gold Star Honeybees?
Gold Star Honeybees. Yeah.
And we'll have that link in the website or in our show notes. If folks want to take a look at the kits and the complete hives and all the other information you have out there.
Well, the other information, Jeff, as you know, Christy's got 2 books out there on this. The first one that came out a while back was Natural Beekeeping in Top Bar Hives. And then here about 5 years ago, she came out with the second one, Advanced Top Bar Beekeeping, Next Steps for the Thinking Beekeeper. So there's a lot of she's provided a lot of information for people.
I'll hold off till the book comes out for the non-thinking beekeeper. I think I'm better suited for that.
I liked that name because it was kind of my response to Beekeeping for Dummies, which is also a good book, by the way. But I just didn't feel like people who were thinking through the details connected to top bar beekeeping and why you would do it were dummies. So I preferred to call them thinking beekeepers. That game got started.
No, it's very cool. That's very cool.
Well, what have we missed? All of the things that we can talk about. What have we missed that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, we talked a little bit about clean wax. We talked about how do you harvest honey. We talked about downsides. We could talk about the winter question and why do people think they don't work in the cold?
That's a good idea.
That'd
Wintering. Give me a little background on how I get my bees through winter in that box that's exposed and sticking up in the air.
I love it that everybody seems to perceive it as so much more exposed when really it's got about the same exposure, but when you put it up on legs, then you've got air moving under it more than you would with the Langstroth hive. But I think the most important thing, and to condense this into a silly sentence that you might remember, there are 3 4-letter words that pertain to winter in top bar hives. And the first one is wind. So if you can break the wind by having some sort of break, whether it's a planting, a fence, a wall, something that keeps the hive from standing in a prevailing wind all winter long, that's task number 1. And sometimes that's enough. If you've got a good location where there isn't a strong, steady wind all winter, then sometimes that does the whole job. But the other thing is food. And you definitely don't want to take so much of their food that they're going to starve in the middle of the winter. And the last thing is cold. And frankly, you can't do a thing about that. So pay attention to the first 2.
It all makes sense, and those 4 things apply to any beehive you got out there. It's a good way to think about it. Christy, this has been fun. It's good talking to you again, and Christy and I used to do Mother Earth news fairs.
Oh, very cool.
Back in the day. Well, like I said, Christy, thank you. Thank you for being with us, spending some time with us. And we will get all of these connections to your books and your company up, and hopefully we can talk somebody into at least trying one. I mean, you got to before people just kind of look at it and shake their head. Try one for a while, and when you get done working bees 5 top bar hives in an afternoon and your back doesn't hurt, you're going to think twice.
It really has been great. Thanks so much for having me on.
Greatly enjoyed having you on. Thank you.
Absolutely.
That was fun talking with Christy. I've seen top bar hives, but I've never worked them. I know you have one. You said you like working with it.
Well, it's a different kind of beekeeping, that's for sure. I mean, she stressed the point that there's no heavy lifting, and it's sort of like the parallel hives the long hives that we've talked about in the past. And what you're lifting is a frame at a time, not a box at a time. So there's a lot to be said for that. It's also up off the ground, a couple 3 feet, so you're not bending over. You're not bending over to pick up a full box. You're not bending over to set it back down again. Those sorts of things. So there's an advantage there, definitely.
Yeah.
I like the way that she works with the entrance, kind of. You put the entrance in the middle of the side, and the bees go in both directions on either side of the entrance, and they sort of form a dual nest situation that once you get used to it, you can deal with it, but getting used to it's different than certainly a Langstroth hive. I like the entrance on the end because then that just follows the Langstroth formula of, brood close to the door and honey in the back. And the thing is that's good if that's what you're used to, but the side entrance is also good if you're not used to the other one, and you can, learn from the start. So there's a lot to be said. And then it's all about the wax, clean wax. And then at the end, she had a couple of good ideas, talking about wind in the winter and enough food. And those, those things are pretty stable no matter what kind of beehive you have, no matter where you are. So Gold Star honeybees, that's Christy Hemenway. She's now back in Maine. She missed the cold winters. I guess she was moved there from North Carolina. I question that move a little bit, but you know what they say, when you live up in that part of the world, there's no such thing as bad weather, it's just bad choice of clothes. So
yeah,
I guess
that sums it up, doesn't it? All right, well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, wherever you download and stream the show. Even better, write a review and let other beekeepers looking for a new podcast know what you like. You can get there directly from our website by clicking on reviews along the top of any web page. As always, we thank Bee Culture, the magazine for American beekeeping, for their continued support of Beekeeping Today podcast. We want to thank our regular episode sponsor, Global Patties. Check them out at www.globalpatties.com. We also want to thank Strong Microbials for their support of this podcast. Check out their full probiotic line at www.strongmicrobials.com. And we also want to thank Better Bee for joining us as the latest supporter of the podcast. Check out their full line of beekeeping supplies at www.betterbee.com. And finally, and most importantly, truly, we want to thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener, for joining us on this show. Feel free to send us questions and comments at questions@beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Anything else, Kim?
I think that sums it up. Next week, another hive, right?
Another hive next week with horizontal hives. So look forward to talking about that.
Okay, good. We'll see you then.
All right, take care, everybody. All right, too bad my mouth isn't working today, but one could argue it never does.